Those people who are standing up and being good Christians and saying, not guilty, not a witch, I don't know why they're doing this, tried, convicted, sentenced, executed. Meanwhile, those people who kind of play ball with the court, over a third of the people accused confess, and they're at least alive for the time being.
You've reached American History Hotline. You ask the questions, we get the answers. Leave a message.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
T-Mobile is reinventing business internet with super broadband. Whether you run a small office or a factory of 500, connection is everything. Powered by America's fastest 5G internet, plus Starlink. Super broadband from T-Mobile reaches every zip code in the U.S. Super broadband, a new era of business internet. Visit superbroadband.com to learn more.
Fastest 5G network based on analysis by Ookla Speed Test Intelligence data 2H 2025. Speeds vary due to local network characteristics and management. Satellite requires hardware installation. Clear view of the sky with 36-month commitment.
If you're a QuickBooks customer looking to grow without the growing pains, you need the Intuit ERP, the AI native ERP that upgrades right from QuickBooks. Learn more at intuit.com/ERP.
This is Tab Ramos from Inside American Soccer. The Cup Knockout Round is now, and DraftKings has you covered for every single match. The DraftKings app is now available in all 50 states and includes all markets, bringing the game straight to your fingertips wherever you are. New DraftKings customers, sign up with code DK1, spend $5 to get $200 in rewards within 21 days. That's code DK1 in partnership with DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Bet with DK Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 1-800-MY-RESET. Connecticut, call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino in Kansas, bet tax pass-through may apply in Illinois. 21 and over. Void in Canada. Event contract trading with DraftKings predictions involves risk of loss. Availability varies. Bet to get bonus bets that expire in 7 days. Trade to get $50 in predictions dollars that expire in 1 year. Issued every 7 days via click-to-claim for 21 days. One non-withdrawable reward redeemable. Predictions offer void in New York. Ends July 19th. Terms at dkng.co/audio.
Aging is real, and so are the benefits of new Vital Proteins Collagen Sparkling Water. Because around the age of 30, your body needs backup to keep your collagen up. So get your daily glow up, now in 3 fresh flavors: strawberry blossom, lemon lime, and blood orange. Improved skin health in as little as 30 days thanks to collagen peptides. Cheers to that. So you can stay vital, stay you. Visit vitalproteins.com to learn more and where to buy. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Hey there, American History Hotliners. Bob Crawford here. Thrilled to be joining you again for another episode of American History Hotline, the show where you ask the questions. You know the drill by now. Send your questions to americanhistoryhotline@gmail.com. That's americanhistoryhotline@gmail.com. Okay, on to today's question. It comes from Eleanor in Flagstaff. She writes, I hear so much about witch hunts and the Salem Witch Trials, but I actually never learned this history. Why were women accused of being witches, and did they actually have trials? How do you defend against being a witch? I love this question, Eleanor. And here to help me answer it is Emerson Baker, author of the book, A Storm of Witchcraft, The Salem Trials and the American Experience, Pivotal Moments in American History. Emerson, thank you for joining me today.
Happy to be here, Bob. And it's a great question.
It is. Emerson, there's so much to get into. To start, can you give us the setting for all of this? Like, when was this, and what does America look like at this point?
Sure. 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts. Massachusetts had been settled in 1620 at Plymouth, and Salem was established in 1626. So we're talking a couple generations in from settlement. At the time, we just have a string of settlements really from, northern North Carolina on up into Maine, sort of hugging the coastline. So it's the early days. Salem is one of the bigger settlements, which probably has a population of about 2,500 people. And it's a very active maritime port on the coast. But if you go interior a few miles to what was known as Salem Village then, you're there in sort of a rural agrarian farming community of maybe about 500 people. These people are devout Puritans who came to New England in the 1630s for religious freedom to worship as they saw fit in the Puritan fashion, a fairly strict branch of Protestantism. And I ought to point out too that I think because of Salem, and the Puritans, people associate witch hunts with them. But witch hunts, unfortunately, is kind of like a universal thing that has taken place throughout time and place. Most societies have some version of a witch hunt. And we know that in Europe, the great age of witch hunts between, about 1400 in the American Revolution in Europe and her colonies, about 100,000 people were tried as witches and about half of them executed. So Salem is sort of taking place towards the end of that. But it's a long, sad story of which Salem is just a small part.
So witch trials, they're not, you're right. Well, you have this idea of witch trials being this New England thing, this thing that happened in the 1600s. But you're telling us like witch trials, no, they've always been around.
Yeah. And in fact, they're frankly kind of still with us in a sad way. We know that, and
wait, hold on, Emerson. I got to stop you there.
All right.
There's the word witch hunt has been overly used, or it's been used a lot the past 10 years now, probably.
Yes.
In our recent history. So let's just get this out of the way. Like, what do you mean?
Okay, I'm sorry. I should have clarified. I'm not trying to go political here on your Bob.
No, you may if you want, or you don't have to. Whatever you want to do.
That is to say that let me back to the basics. In large part, a witch hunt is largely scapegoating, right? It's like someone. If you have a big problem in your village, bad weather, crop failures, unexplained sickness. In traditional villages, people are looking for someone to blame, right? Someone who's the witch. And unfortunately, witch hunts continue today in part of the world, parts of Africa and India, where if those sorts of things take place, mobs, not the justice system, because the justice system in those countries would not believe in witches, but in local villages where people aren't particularly well educated, they literally will take the person that they think is causing the harm to the village. A lynch mob will round them up and actually kill them in rather terrible fashion. The way they do it in most places is they actually, it's called tiring people. You take someone and you tie them up and you put a tire over their neck, pour gasoline on them and set them on fire. So when I say witch hunts are real, I don't mean frankly the relatively mild stuff of American politicians sort of sniping at each other. I'm talking about life or death matters in part of the world. So, and again, that's sort of the modern version of it, but they've been going on in one time or another. And again, pretty much every society, Bob, around the world has some form of witch hunts. I hate to say this, but I think, as long as we have serious disagreements and are willing to scapegoat other people because they're different in some way, we're going to have it, unfortunately. But we know that in Europe, starting in like the 1400s and 1500s, there were huge outbreaks. And the one in Salem was the largest in American history, but it's pretty small. So give you an example. There was an outbreak in Cologne, Germany in the 1620s. It lasted a decade, and about 2,000 people were burnt at the stake. And there's so many people that it's like round, fuzzy numbers because we don't have all the names in the statistics, right? So, and to some degrees, it's funny to me that people sort of, but Salem is the most famous, right? And that's the one that people...
Well, allow me to...
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
No, this is all amazing. And so you're telling me in Cologne in the 1620s, now we're talking about the 90s,
yep.
Like we're in the same period,
yep.
Right? Was this part of the Reformation? Is there a connection between the Reformation and witch hunts?
Absolutely. Well, in part, yes. But again, witch hunts, indirectly, witch hunts take place in most religions. Again, whether Christian, non-Christian, all parts of the world, Eastern Orthodox, you name it. And I think, again, maybe sort of Puritans get a bad rap because for us, we tend to think like, it was those stern people who dressed in black and white and didn't have fun. Well, no, they weren't like that. But that's another story. Okay, that's another question. But witch hunts take place when there's tensions in society. And in early modern Europe, after the Reformation, Martin Luther and all that, you're talking about a couple hundred years of religious tension and warfare, of people arguing over what is the proper way to go to heaven and the proper way to worship God in the Christian fashion. And unfortunately, we know in some ways Christians can be maybe harsher on fellow Christians sometimes than others, because they disagree with how you feel you should worship. So throughout the 1500s and 1600s, particularly in those areas that were torn by division between Catholics and Protestants over the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, you see a lot of religious tensions that result in witch hunts. And that doesn't mean that people are saying, oh, my next door neighbor is a Catholic, they're a witch, they need to be burnt at the stake. I really think most of these are much more subtle, Bob. It's like, things are going wrong in our village. Who do we blame? Well, there are those people next door, and they worship God a little differently than me, and they speak with an accent, and they dress funny. So maybe they're the problem, you see? And it's in those senses, it's those kinds of tensions that result from the Reformation. Also, too, some people say, some historians point to, this is the time when sort of we're looking at the beginning of sort of the global economy and the evolution of what we now know as capitalism. And that you have a lot of change going on, breakup of traditional medieval village life, and change is tough.
Emerson, change brings out the crazy in folks. Let's just call it what it is. Okay, so we're talking about Salem in the 1690s. Give us details of this particular witch hunt that we're talking about, witch trials. What were some of the accusations?
Sure.
Set the scene for us.
Well, first off, again, just to point out quickly that there were about 100 people accused of witchcraft in New England before 1692, but usually it's only one or two people. Salem in 1692 is in New England, particularly Massachusetts, is in a really precarious situation. I call my book A Storm of Witchcraft to reflect that idea of the perfect storm, that you have a lot of bad things taking place. And when you do that in the age before science, people are looking to see how they've displeased God, right? Because everything is a sign of God's pleasure or displeasure to Puritans. So how about people being concerned about declining religious fervor? Not as many people are attending worship as they should, and attendance is dropping, and not as many people are joining the church. And add to that a war going on with the French and the Wabanaki Native Americans in northern New England. And add to that what we now know was the worst weather in hundreds of years, the extremes of the Little Ice Age, where you have horrible winters, hot, dry summers, crop failures. So, and if you want to add to that, in the spring of 1692, a new governor is arriving in Massachusetts with a new charter that is a new form of government. And all of these uncertainties, right? How is this going to happen? What is going to happen to us? Is the new government going to work out? Are the attacks going to destroy our village? Make people start to say, this is clear that Satan has been set loose in our colony as a test for us of our Christian fervor. And clearly there are witches here, and now we need to start rounding them up.
Okay, so who were the accused?
So the accusers start off with, in witchcraft, it's like, that famous line in Casablanca, round up the usual suspects, Bob, right?
Yes, yeah.
That's what it was. Witchcraft was normally a crime on the wrong side of the tracks, right? There's the working class people, usually women, someone will,
Why women?
Why women?
Yes.
Okay, let's go back to, I don't know about you, but I have an amazing wife and two strong, wonderful daughters who've made it successfully into their 30s. So it hurts me to even think such things or to say such things. But people didn't always feel that way about women, right? In the 17th century and in the earlier times, they were considered to be, and I'm putting this in quote marks, and you can see this, Bob. My audience can't.
I do. I see these quote marks. I see the air quotes.
The weaker vessel, not as smart, more susceptible to Satan's wiles, you see, because Satan can tempt them with all kinds of things. And men, again, not true, but they perceive men to be sort of smarter. Remember, women are made out of Adam's rib. And so that's powerful stuff. So as it turns out, because of that, people immediately suspect women as witches. But again, this is not just a European early modern thing. Throughout time and space, most pre-modern societies, have their concerns about women. And so about 3/4 of the people in Salem and pretty much every witch hunt are women. And it's worse than that because they believe that witchcraft was passed throughout families. So you could have husbands or sons of witches who were accused.
So you're saying it's like genetic?
Well, they didn't understand genetics. We're a long ways from genetics, Bob, but exactly. They believed it was handed down from one member of the family to the other. And the other thing, too, is, well, what about a man who's not related? What about a neighbor and he has the temerity to accuse a woman of not being a witch, saying, hey, no, you may have accused her, but this woman, I know her. She's a good neighbor. She's a good Christian. She's not a witch. And we know what witch hunts are like. And under those circumstances, people can say, well, that's funny. You seem like a good guy, and we see you at church on Sunday. But why on earth would you defend someone that we know is a witch? What, Bob, does that say about you? Are you one too? So you see how it grows?
It's an impossible situation.
Yes.
It becomes like this mob mentality.
Yep.
So put a face on this.
Sure.
Give me a specific person who was accused.
So the first three who were accused in Salem are the usual suspects. You have Sarah Good, who's a distempered, they describe, again, probably a poor woman who's mentally challenged. She's a pauper. She's homeless. She's going around house to house, begging door to door. Okay, so that's one. She's accused along with Tituba, who's a Native American woman who's enslaved by Reverend Paris, who's the minister in the village. And there's also Sarah Osborne, who's we might call her as a reasonably well-to-do middle-class woman, but she's been widowed. Her husband, and after her husband dies, she has this apparently handsome, younger indentured servant who's contracted to work for the family for 7 years. She decides to free him and marry him. And also, too, he's not English, he's Welsh, which again would make him a little bit stand out. So she scandalized the family. So here you have people who sort of scandalized people who were paupers and distempered or enslaved. So it really is those kind of usual suspects who are the
easy
first.
targets.
Easy target. Low-hanging fruit, isn't it? Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And these are the people, too, you can see, though, who might be really susceptible to Satan's temptations. Oh, you promise me wealth. You promise me a good life. You promise me a rich reward in the afterlife. And so those traditionally are the victims. But in Salem, where it gets insidious is before long, even good church members are being accused, even leaders of the colony. In the end, you have almost 170 people arrested and charged with witchcraft. Of those, 19 will be executed. One who refuses to cooperate with the court is literally pressed to death. They pile rocks on top of him and try to press out a plea. And 5 people die in prison because basically, think of the word dungeon. So if you're locked up there for like a year before trial, 5 people died. But before it's over, Bob, and here's the thing, it basically ends months later when the governor of Massachusetts calls a halt to the proceedings after...
Who was the governor at this time?
Governor Sir William Phipps. He was a wealthy man, the first American to be knighted by the King of England. But his wife, he's off trying to fight the war in Maine and lead the army. And when he gets home in October, he finds out that someone has accused his wife of being a witch. At which point, he writes the king and queen and says, yeah, there's been some witch hunts here, but I've now brought the proceedings to a halt because there are people that I know for a fact are not witches. So, okay, no jokes about his wife. But seriously, it took something like that for him to say, wow, something's gone off the rails here, I guess, because I know my wife and her best friend are not witches, and her best friend is the wife of the leading minister of the colony. So we know these women are above reproach and are not witches. So it's only when things go that far wrong after 19 people have been executed that do things finally come to an end. And even then, when he stops them, some people are saying, like, the Chief Justice is very upset. He's so upset when the trials come to a halt. At one point, he basically storms out of the courtroom and won't come back for a week.
Hey everyone, it's the Jonas Brothers. This week on the podcast, Hey Jonas, we're hanging out with the one, the only, and the one, Michael Bublé.
You guys, I'm genuinely a huge fan. Like, it's funny, you know, I made a whole thing about doing this TikTok where I got you guys to sign the guitar, but right. It was real. Like, we listen to you in the car all the time. Like, it literally is hanging up with all your signatures.
Wow. I am so honored. After Kevin's recent, let's call it interesting confession about Michael, I had a feeling this wasn't going to be going away. We figured there was only one thing to do. We must invite Michael Bublé on the podcast, and we want to know what's on his Sexy Time playlist.
You know, I did an interview, and they're like, have you heard about this Jonas Brothers thing? And they're like, what did you think of it? And I was like, well, I mean, it's reciprocal. Like, what a man got to do? What a man got to do?
We talk about Kevin's confession, Michael's reaction, and a whole lot more. Do you have a hockey rink in your house?
I do.
Our conversation with Michael Bublé is out now. Listen to Hey Jonas on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What's up, fam? I'm sports journalist Ari Chambers.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your girl, Sam J.
And we're the hosts of Everyone Watches Women's Sports, a new podcast from Together and iHeart Women's Sports.
Because let's be real, women's sports is giving us way too much to talk about these days.
The highlights, the rivalries, the breakout stars, the moments that take over your entire timeline.
And the conversations that start during the game and somehow keep going all week.
Every week, we're breaking down the biggest stories across women's sports.
We'll give you our takes, our debates, and probably a few disagreements.
We'll talk to athletes, celebrate big moments, and get into what's happening on and off the field, court, track, and beyond.
Because we're not just interested in what happened, we're interested in why everyone's talking about it. Because everyone watches women's sports. So if you're already a fan,
or you're just getting into the game, there's a seat for you right here.
Listen to Everyone Watches Women's Sports
on the iHeartRadio app,
Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, I'm Hoda Kotb, host of the podcast Joy 101 with Hoda Kotb. Okay, if you know me, you know this. I'm always searching for inspiration, for support, and useful tools to help maximize joy. So this podcast lets us uncover all of that together. We're going to have these meaningful conversations with the world's most fascinating people, like when actress Olivia Munn shared how she overcame fierce health challenges that she never saw coming.
I've gone through breast cancer and then helped my mother through breast cancer, and that was more difficult. There's a lot of people who understand postpartum depression. I was not prepared for postpartum anxiety.
Olympic champ Shawn Johnson revealed why she had no choice but to be a gymnast.
There was something about gymnastics that was intoxicating to me. It's given me a belief that we all have one of those treasures inside of us. We just have to find it.
Listen to Joy 101 with Hoda Kotb on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
My first guest is Paris Hilton, Shakira, Luke and Yerin, Samira y Gracie. I'm so excited.
On the bouncy bed.
You have surprises?
Many surprises.
Welcome to Suite 305, where the group chat comes to life. What up? Es como que una forma de decir como, hola amiga, hola mejor amiga, hola hermana, what up?
Mira, nunca lo había hablado con nadie. Excepto con mis hijos. Mis hijos sí saben. Yes.
Sé mi amante.
Uf. Punch. Qué increíble. Ya, la telenovela.
You're the only person I know that loves the yellow starburst.
It's lemonade. No hay alguien que te falta, como que tú dices, me gustaría colaborar con esta persona. This is Suite 305. Listen to Suite 305 with Lele Pons as part of my Cultura podcast network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is American History Hotline. I'm your host, Bob Crawford. Today, my guest is Emerson Baker, author of the book A Storm of Witchcraft, The Salem Trials and the American Experience, Pivotal Moments in American History. We're talking about witches in a kangaroo court. That's right, the Salem Witch Trials. But hey, we can talk about whatever you want next week. If you have a question about American history, send it our way. Record yourself using the voice memo app on your phone and email it to AmericanHistoryHotline@gmail.com. That's AmericanHistoryHotline@gmail.com. Now, back to the show. Emerson, I want to kind of dig in here a little bit. Looking at the accusers, right, and how this thing spreads. Okay, so it seems like first you're accusing the people on the fringes of society, right? The enslaved woman, the woman who is struggling mentally, the woman who's not traditional, who's been widowed, who maybe has taken on a younger man, right? He was indentured, she's freedom. Like you said, the low hanging fruit. But this works its way all the way up to the wife of the governor and her friend, and the chief justice wants to keep. Okay, so just talk about how the accusations spread.
So what's really unusual in Salem is the accusers tend to be largely teenage girls. There are a couple of older women. There's a boy and a man involved too, but the core group of about a dozen are mostly between the ages of about 13 and 20. Okay, they tend to be sort of, most of them tend to be sort of at the fringes, though some of them are not. Some of them are leaders in the community. The first to be afflicted, the daughter and niece of the minister, the most respected, most devout, most Christian.
So how does that happen?
Okay, so again, I go back to the perfect storm analogy because there's so many people making accusations about so many different things that there's no single explanation. You know, this idea of they ate moldy bread and they had a bad LSD trip is the standard one of Salem. It just doesn't fit. But I think there could have been lots of medical reasons, psychological reasons. But originally, I think the first two, these girls, they were about 10 and 11, and there are hard times in Salem Village. The villages try to fire their father as a minister. They've stopped paying his salary. They've stopped providing firewood to the house. And he's convinced that Satan is in their midst. And he's storming around the parsonage, practicing his sermons, fire and brimstone sermons. God is angry. He's coming, and he's basically taken no prisoners, right? And Satan is in our midst, and we have to drive Satan out. And these poor girls are absolutely terrified. Absolutely, and they don't know why dad's freaking out, but they know Satan's here and they're worried. Long story short, Bob, and again, I'm no clinical psychiatrist, nor do I play one on television, but in their case, it sounds like they're suffering really from what we'd call today called conversion disorder, what they used to call mass hysteria, but where they're not faking their symptoms. What they do is they start saying that they're being attacked by invisible assailants. They feel like 1,000 pins are sticking into their bodies. They start wanting to do things like they bark like a dog. They lose their vision temporarily. They want to throw themselves into the roaring fire and don't know why. They've lost control over their bodies, and they don't understand why, which makes it all the more scary. And
so what you're describing for me sounds like medical anxiety, or what we used to call hypochondria, or where the human body can play tricks on the mind, and the mind can play tricks on the human body, and these symptoms are real, but the original source of the symptoms is not,
and it's unknown, which makes it worse. You're right. It's driven by anxiety, and today it's called conversion disorder, and there are cases of it. And what that means is literally, our minds are really powerful things that we still don't fully understand, right? And so your mind is so overwrought from these young girls and anxious about what's going on that literally their body takes over, but isn't telling them that, right? And so their body is causing these symptoms, and the symptoms. So essentially, what it does is your mind is converting your anxiety into physical symptoms, but again, not telling you, and that makes your anxiety worse, right? So. And what's interesting is there are outbreaks today. There was one in upstate New York, a famous case about a dozen years ago in Leroy, New York, which is like a post-industrial town, kind of on the decline, at least in the time. Hopefully it's doing better these days. And interesting about this, about 3/4 of the victims, high percentage of the victims of a conversion disorder, teenagers, predominantly women. And again, I think of the tough lives that our teenage girls have today with issues of body image and all these things, is right. Well, imagine in a patriarchal society that doesn't value women like men. In the 17th century, it was worse, and so you have these girls who really start catching these symptoms. But what's interesting about conversion disorder then and now is the power of suggestion, right? So who are the first in Salem Village? The daughter and niece of the minister, the most important people in town. They're your leaders of the community. And then by the power of suggestion, their neighbors' children start to behave the same way. In Leroy, New York, I think it was in about 2012, 13 or 14, guess who it hit first? The cheerleaders in the high school, the trendsetters, right? And then once they're having symptoms, all these kids will start, barking and screaming in the middle of class. And again, and you know what? Then it took them forever to explain it because no one wants to go to they have some mental crisis. Instead, it's like, well, remember, we had that train go off the tracks a few miles out of town, and weren't there a few years ago, and weren't there some nasty chemicals on it and stuff? And it's the same ways in Salem. People don't understand this process. So what do? You call in a doctor, and pretty soon he makes the diagnosis of bewitchment because, again, it's real.
How do you prove someone is a witch? And at first, two questions. One, how do you prove someone's a witch? How do you prove someone's not a witch?
Yeah, well, it's a lot easier to prove than to disprove, isn't it? And that's the problem. And that's why witch hunts tend to spread, right? Because particularly too, in Salem, the reason Salem gets out of hand is they use questionable evidence. Normally, so you mentioned kangaroo courts before, and fortunately this wasn't Australia, but it's an English justice similar to what we'd recognize. Okay, normally innocent until proven guilty. Normally, there's only two ways to convict someone of witchcraft. Now, this makes sense, Bob, right? If you have someone who confesses, okay, why would you confess? Well, unfortunately, normally because they've used some, and again, I'll use those quote marks, mild judicial torture, all right? Or you have two people giving eyewitness testimony saying that they've seen you commit an act of black magic using Satan's powers, which frankly, then or now is kind of hard to do. So in Salem, they use this other weird evidence called spectral evidence, and this is, people knew that Satan could give his powers to witches. It's in the Bible. It's real. Everyone believes. This is not superstition, right? But one of the ways that Satan could use his powers or give to people was to form specters. He could create spirits or ghosts of people, and those ghosts could harm people, okay? And the specter is invisible to anybody but the assailant. So I could be standing in a room and I'd be going like, oh, Bob, stop. And people would look at me and they'd say, well, wait a second, Bob's not even here. What are you saying? No, right? No, he's causing that's spectral affliction. Now this, again, we're kind of joking at this because it seems crazy to us. Well, the point is it actually was crazy in the 17th century, but not for the reasons we feel. But because, again, remember, some people said, look, if your specter's being used, and this, unfortunately, the judges believe this, if your specter's being used, you're in league with Satan. But others said, hang on, Satan is the great trickster. What if he's not only trying to harm Emerson, but he's also trying to get Bob in trouble and get him accused of witchcraft? You see, it's a twofer. So, but the point is, people in Salem were so hard-pressed that so many things were going wrong that they used this dubious evidence. And everybody in Salem was accused initially on this spectral evidence, which is just crazy stuff. And so in this sense, it's easy to accuse people of being a witch, right?
We are not far from this being the norm again.
Well, yeah, that's the whole nother talk. I mean, but I think as an aside, I think the big problem that we face today in our country is that it's so easy to demonize our enemy, right? When in fact, if you sit down with them over a meal or a cup of coffee, you'd find out that you really agree about 95% of the things that are really important. But that's it, yeah, they're the enemy, they're the cause of our problems. So let's let the witch hunt begin. Yeah.
So I think about the presidential pardon today, or a governor granting a stay of execution. Could the accused petition someone in a higher power, like a governor or a high court judge, for relief?
Yes, and it eventually works, but not throughout the summer of 1692, when several of the accused There's one, Rebecca Nurse, who's this saintly woman who's about 80, a God-fearing Christian. Her family and neighbors, they get almost 50 signatures on a petition saying, look, I don't agree with the nurse's politics, but they're not witches, right? And that petition goes to the governor, and even when she goes to trial, she's initially found not guilty. But the Chief Justice says, I don't think jury, and again, there's a jury here of 12 good men, and they came back not guilty. But they said, and I'm sure they said, well, the petitions and all this. And he said, look, you didn't look at some of this evidence. Let's look at this again. Bob, they came back again guilty. And she was executed, this poor woman. But so eventually, in the fall of 1692, after they have a last session of the court. In 2 weeks, they convict and execute 8 people for witchcraft in these really rushed trials. And people begin to say, things are going wrong here. And it's not long after that the ministers intervene, who's sort of like the leading sort of experts on theology and witches in the colony, right? And the leading minister, this man whose wife had been accused, Increase Mather, very famous Puritan theologian, well known today, and as well as his son Cotton Mather, right? Increase Mather writes a book, and in it he essentially says, okay, it's getting to the stage where we know innocent lives are being lost, so clearly we can't prove beyond reasonable shadow of doubt that someone's a witch. We're making mistakes here. And he ends up saying in his book, better that 10 witches live than one innocent life be shed. And that's only then does it come to an end. People don't stop believing in witches, Bob. They kept believing in witches. They just said, we don't have a perfect justice system to convict them.
Is this before Blackstone's law book was published?
So there are a number of legal books that they're using. Blackstone's commentaries is a little bit later, but they do have. But yeah, you know what? They're still executing some people in Europe for this. In England, there was a major witch hunt in England during the English Civil War in the 1640s, where things are kind of, again, religious and military and political tensions. Over 100 people were executed, and the last execution, let's see, in Scotland is like 1697. So, and there are witch hunts in the 1680s in England, but they're starting to peter out in large part because, yes, you do have English legal officials sort of saying like, yeah, the spectral evidence isn't too good. And again, maybe, but having said that, the Chief Justice, the future Chief Justice of England, sought to the conviction and execution of several women in the 1660s. And sort of, so he felt even at that point, the legal justices in the land, the leading leaders of it, of your system, are saying, yep, there's still enough evidence to convict people of witchcraft in extreme cases. So again, what Salem is doing is sort of an extreme, but it's not totally out of line with what's going on.
Okay, so what happened to the poor people who were convicted?
So those originally, there's again, they hold like 30 trials. Talk about a kangaroo court, Bob. Almost all of those people pled not guilty, were tried, convicted, sentenced, and again, 19 of them were executed. They had others they were waiting to execute. They had other people they were waiting to try. Some of them who sat for months in prison. The good news was, after Increase Mather writes his book, and also other people begin to complain, the governor, and by the way, Increase Mather, the minister, was also the governor's top political advisor. We didn't have any division of church and state here at all. So there's kind of a slippery slope there. But I do think that Salem changed that. People began to say, maybe this isn't a great idea, right? Because they also, too, by the way, one of those people at 19 executed was a Puritan minister. And 5 ministers were accused, and even other politicians were accused. Members of the legislature were accused. So everybody's getting accused here. But long story short, in the fall, in October, Governor Phipps says, we have to end this court. But at this point, they still have over 100 people in prison. And many of them some have been convicted, others awaiting trial. Bob, you won't believe this, though. 55 people confessed to witchcraft in 1692. Confessed. Guess how?
But I mean, it's a death sentence to confess, right?
Well, yeah, but guess how many of them died?
How many?
0, none. Now, having said this, I think they would have eventually, but in the early stages, they noticed, like Tituba, who was one of the first to confess back in the spring, all throughout the summer of 1692, she hasn't even been tried. What they're doing is, I'm sure we all have our favorite crime show where they bring in like the little fish and they sort of start sweating them, like, okay, if you just flip over Mr. or Mrs. Big, we can talk, right? And that's what they were doing with people. They'd get people to confess and then say, okay, great. We know this is a huge witch hunt. Tituba even said there were 9 witches who had signed Satan's book. So help us find the other people. So talk to us. When you flew into that coven, who was there? I don't know. There was some guy from Boston, but he was wearing his hat down and it was dark and I didn't quite catch his name. But eventually, no. You need to name names. You need to tell us. Now, the joke is, again, eventually, there's only one punishment for witchcraft. Just like today, you commit a capital crime, you're in Massachusetts, you would be sentenced to death then. But literally, people are seeing like, wow, those people who are standing up and being good Christians and saying, not guilty, not a witch, I don't know why they're doing this, tried, convicted, sentenced, executed. Meanwhile, those people who kind of play ball with the court, over a third of the people accused confess, and they're at least alive for the time being. And when some of these people probably would have been convicted if Phipps hadn't ultimately issued pardons for them. And so it keeps on playing out for like another 6 months under a new court.
So what is the means of death? What is the means of punishment?
Well, I like to think that, the English folk are reasonably civilized. They aren't burning witches, but people are being hanged. And it's a miserable way to go because, not to get too gory here, but essentially back then they didn't have what we now call a short drop where people break their necks, but you had people who were strangulated and it might take 8 or 10 minutes. So it's a god-awful way to die. And of course, and people always say in Salem they were burning witches. That's a misconception. In Europe, on the continent in particular, they tended to burn witches, but that's because it's treated as a religious crime, as committing heresy. And in Europe, they burned heretics. In England and America, it's our standard sort of criminal courts where we don't have ecclesiastical courts who are trying people. So they're tried and sentenced and executed like other murdered people who committed murders and other capital crimes. So, but again, pretty horrible way to go, unfortunately. No, unless except for Giles Corey, who of course is literally pressed to death to try to get an answer. An 80-year-old guy being pressed to death. I think the good news for him was that he didn't hold up too long, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for him, right? Pretty bad. This was not, Bob, this was not a kinder or gentler time, okay? Really wasn't.
So I think about the Red Scare, yep, and the fear it spread, and Joseph McCarthy, and thank God he was ultimately called out, by people like Edward R. Murrow, but lives were ruined. Lives were ruined. What's the aftermath of the Salem trials?
Well, my short answer is that's the book I'm writing now, so you'll have to wait. But no, but
I love it
because I think that's the important story about how these people recovered. It did take. They changed they started a new court. They changed the proceedings. They said you can't use spectral evidence anymore. And guess what, Bob? No one was found guilty. There were 3 people who confessed because they were still playing under those old rules. But the governor pardons them and no more lives are lost. But it takes until May 1693 before the last people are tried. And even then, it's sort of a tragedy because you won't believe this. Back then, it's bad enough to be in prison, right? How about if they treated it like a really bad motel where you had to pay for your room and board? And so in the 17th century, your family, there was one woman who had been found not guilty in the spring of 1693. And before her, she was from a poor family, and before they could come up with the money and come get her out of prison to pay for basically her room and board, she died. So that is to say, families can continue to suffer really what we now recognize as transgenerational trauma, right? Where we know there were people immediately, here's the good news, families, friends, neighbors immediately rallied for those victims who were still alive. to try to get them pardoned, because at this point they were legally dead before the law. They didn't even have legal standing. Once you're a convicted felon back then, you lose pretty much all rights. You can't even go issue a petition to the court asking for a pardon because they can't recognize you legally. Funny, you're standing right there, but you're legally dead, right? So it took, long story short, it took until 1704, I think it was 1703 actually, to get the first handful of people pardoned. By 1710, they issue a more general pardon, where people are pardoned and also get some financial damages, some minor compensation to help pay those jailer's fees, right? But honestly, there were still about 8 or 9 people not pardoned, and they won't get pardoned. There's a wave of them between the 1950s in Massachusetts and the last one in 2022, where the legislature finally agreed at the urging, in the last case, of a middle school civics class and civics teacher to ask if the last convicted witch could receive a pardon. So it was a really long time getting justice for these people. But to some degrees, I think that constant push to get justice by the families, which lasted for over 50 years initially, I think that's one of the reasons why Salem is so well known, because it was such an injustice. I think it's the first mass failure of an American government to protect the innocent lives. And I think no one let the government or the accusers forget that. And I think that's one reason why Salem's so well known.
Were there any, you talk about how there were witch trials, before this and witch trials since, were there any other major ones in the United States?
No.
After Salem?
There was one trial found not guilty in Connecticut 5 years later, but essentially Salem is the last real witch trial in America. But having said that, on into the 18th century, these cases will show up in court. But guess what? By this time, they're slander cases. The woman who's been accused of a witch, she and her husband are going to court and getting damages from the people who have accused them. But we know this. But again, we know the belief is still there. And in fact, people use counter magic on their houses. Here's the problem, Bob. If the courts aren't going to take action against witches, you have to have a home security system, right? So people put counter magic up on their houses, like horseshoes over doors. That horseshoes were originally designed to ward off against witches. Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
So there are steps. There are no witch trials because people know they can't convict, but that doesn't stop the belief, and it keeps on going. I've seen houses built around here where I live in Maine in the late 19th century that still are protected with things like horseshoes and stuff like that. To sort of, and again, at what point does it pass the threshold from believe in witches to kind of superstitions or traditions, right? We're never quite sure. But that is to say, those, folk beliefs tend to last a real long time. And it took a long time too for their stain to be removed from these families, even after the government took action.
So button it up for us.
Okay.
What makes the Salem witch trials a pivotal moment in American history?
Well, again, I think it is like that huge first crisis for America. Frankly, we don't pass the test too well, right? But it also it just becomes an important lesson. I guess, Bob, what I say is every generation had its Salem moment. Almost from, today we think this use of politicians and its petitions of left, right, and center who invoke witch hunts. I remember, it isn't just the president. A few years ago is Hillary Clinton supporter talking about the Benghazi witch hunts, right? So it's an equal opportunity witch hunts are, right? But it's one of these things that every generation in America made reference back to Salem and had its own witch hunts. And you mentioned McCarthyism, and that's the one, the crucible that we're best known for. But in the American Revolution, loyalists were accusing patriots of, being fervent witches and extremists in their beliefs. If you look, Southerners accused Northern abolitionists in the 1830s and 40s of basically murdering witches and being extreme in their views. As their ancestors were extreme in their views, and they were just as bad with their abolitionist beliefs. Every time the Red Scare after World War I, the Palmer raids, has those kinds of moments. So to me, the lesson here is, this is we have to work together to understand people and to try and not to demonize our enemies, and to realize that as Americans we welcome diverse views. on politics and everything else. And the real hard work for us is to work hard to understand folks and all have civil discourse and civil disagreements, because otherwise we're going to go back to that example of Salem and keep, at least metaphorically, hanging witches.
Well, with the social media spreading conspiracy theories like wildfire, we're going to get to the point where we believe in witches once again. And who knows where that will lead us. I mean, it's just, we're not getting smarter, people. We're not getting smarter. I've been talking with Emerson Baker, author of the book, A Storm of Witchcraft, The Salem Trials and the American Experience, Pivotal Moments in American History. Emerson, when you write that next book, please come back. You're always welcome here on the American History Hotline.
Will do, Bob. Looking forward to it.
You've been listening to American History Hotline, a production of iHeart Podcasts and Scratch Track Productions. The show's executive producer is James Morrison. Our executive producers from iHeart are Jordan Runtaw and Jason English. Original music composed by me, Bob Crawford. Please keep in touch. Our email is americanhistoryhotline@gmail.com. If you like the show, please tell your friends and leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. I'm your host, Bob Crawford. Feel free to hit me up on social media to ask a history question or to let me know what you think of the show. You can find me at Bob Crawford Base. Thanks so much for listening. See you next week.
What's up, fam? It's sports journalist Ari Chambers.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your girl, Sam J.
And we're the hosts of Everyone Watches Women's Sports, a new podcast from Together.
We're breaking down the biggest headlines, the viral moments, and the stories everyone's talking about across women's sports.
From game-changing performances to culture-shifting conversations, we'll give you our takes, our debates, and a few laughs along the way.
Because everyone watches women's sports. Listen to Everyone Watches Women's Sports
on the iHeartRadio app,
Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Joy is essential and it's also elusive. But now there's a new and exciting way to start your journey toward a more joyful existence. Joy 101. It's a new podcast hosted by me, Hoda Kotb. If you're craving inspiration to maximize your joy, tune into these candid, uplifting, and moving on-air chats. Open your free iHeartRadio app, search Joy 101, and listen now. Joy 101 with Hoda Kotb is presented by CVS.
My first guest is Paris Hilton, Shakira, Luke, and Yerin. Have surprises?
Many surprises.
Welcome to the Suite 305 podcast, where the group chat comes to life.
What up? You're the only person I know that loves a yellow Starburst. It's lemonade.
This is Suite 305. Here, oversharing is encouraged. Listen to Suite 305 with Lele Pons on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everyone, it's the Jonas Brothers. This week on the podcast, Hey Jonas, we're hanging out with Michael Bublé. After Kevin's recent interesting confession about Michael, we figured there's only one thing to do. We must invite Michael Bublé on the podcast, and we want to know what's on his Sexy Time playlist.
You know, I did an interview, and they're like, have you heard about this Jonas Brothers thing? And they were like, what did you think of it? And I was like, well, I mean, it's reciprocal.
We talk about Kevin's confession, Michael's reaction, and a whole lot more. Our conversation with Michael Bublé is out now. Listen to Hey Jonas on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.